The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast a cold light over the elite of the city, but Julian Vance barely noticed the opulence. Power was something Julian understood perfectly, and tonight, power was not enough. To secure the international merger that would cement Vance Global's legacy, the conservative board of directors had demanded one absurd condition: a stable family image. A wife. He turned his gaze away from the glittering skyline and saw her. Ilara Thorne. She was the discarded ex-fiancée of Silas Mercer, Julian's most ruthless competitor. Silas had publicly humiliated her to marry into an old money dynasty. Julian saw an opportunity. Taking Silas's discarded ex and turning her into the queen of the Vance Empire would be the ultimate strike against his rival. Julian crossed the room, the crowd parting for him out of sheer habit. He found Ilara near the terrace doors, wearing a simple black dress that mocked the ostentatious wealth around them. He offered her a glass of champagne, his voice low and calculated. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Thorne, a mutually beneficial arrangement." Ilara looked at him, her eyes sharp and completely devoid of the awe he was used to. She did not take the glass. "I do not make deals with men who look at me like I am a piece on a chessboard, Mr. Vance." Julian smirked, surprised by her defiance. "Silas threw you away," he said softly. "Marry me for 1 year. You get financial independence and I get the board's approval, plus we both get to watch Silas squirm." Ilara stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper but heavy with warning. "Silas took more from me than a wedding ring. If I agree to this, it is on my terms. I am not your puppet." The wedding took place 2 weeks later. It was a cold, efficient affair in a judge's chambers, followed by a lavish reception purely for the cameras. Silas Mercer was there, watching from the corner with a sneer that barely concealed his unease. Ilara stood tall beside Julian, radiating a quiet strength. Later that evening, in the massive master suite of Julian's mansion, he handed her a velvet box containing a spectacular diamond necklace. "A gift for playing your part so well today," he offered. Ilara left the box on the dresser, not even opening it. "Keep your diamonds, Julian. My loyalty cannot be bought, only earned." Her refusal sparked something unexpected in him, a flicker of genuine respect that cut through his cynical worldview. As weeks turned into months, the forced proximity began to chip away at their armor. They fought, of course. They fought over his obsessive control and her stubborn independence. But there were quiet moments too. One evening, after a grueling day of board meetings, Julian found Ilara asleep on the library sofa, a thick corporate law book resting on her chest. He gently removed the book and covered her with a cashmere blanket, pausing to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. It was a small, silent gesture, but it felt dangerously real. The fragile peace shattered on the night of a major charity gala. Silas cornered Ilara in the hallway, taunting her about her new fake life and mocking the memory of her father. Julian intervened, his eyes dark with fury, but the damage was done. Back home, the tension exploded. Julian demanded to know why Silas's words had provoked such a visceral reaction. "Why are you so obsessed with studying my legal files regarding Mercer Holdings, Ilara? Are you feeding him information?" Ilara's eyes filled with hot, angry tears. "You think I would help the man who destroyed my family?" she practically shouted, her voice breaking with the weight of years of pain. "Silas did not just leave me. He orchestrated the financial fraud that ruined my father's empire. I am the sole heir to the original Thorne fortune. I lost everything, including the father who died of a broken heart because of him." Julian froze. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He had thought she was just a discarded lover with a bruised ego, but she was a survivor of a corporate massacre he had blindly profited from in the market. Guilt and anger waged war inside him, leading to a profound, icy distance between them. For days, they barely spoke. The penthouse felt like a tomb, but Julian could not ignore the ache in his chest. He stopped buying her expensive apologies and started paying attention. He woke up early just to brew her favorite dark roast coffee, leaving the steaming mug on her desk without a word. He quietly cancelled his lucrative evening meetings just to sit in the same room with her, reading in silence, letting his presence be a steady, undemanding anchor. Their silent truce was violently interrupted when Silas Mercer launched a hostile takeover attempt against Vance Global. Silas had fabricated a massive scandal, planting evidence to suggest Julian was involved in the very same offshore fraud that had ruined the Thorne family. The board panicked, threatening to oust Julian entirely. As the media swarmed their building, Ilara did not run. She stood by Julian's side in the elevator, their hands tightly intertwined. "We fight him together," she said, her voice steady and resolute. The final confrontation took place at the annual shareholders' summit. Silas stood at the podium, gloating, ready to call for a vote of no confidence against Julian. But Julian stepped forward, his expression utterly calm. "Before you vote, there is a document you all need to see." The massive double doors opened, and Julian's chief legal counsel walked in, handing thick dossiers to every board member and the eager press. The room fell dead silent as they read. It was a complete, undeniable paper trail proving Silas Mercer's original fraud against Thorne Industries and his recent attempts to frame Vance Global. Julian had used all his vast resources to uncover the truth Ilara had sought for years. Silas's face drained of color. He stammered, looking around for allies, but his investors were already turning their backs, pulling out their phones in a panic to sell their shares. The media cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every second of his public ruin. He was destroyed utterly and completely, right there in the spotlight he craved. That night the penthouse was quiet again, but the coldness was gone forever. Julian stood by the window, but this time he was not looking at the city. He was looking at Ilara. "I did not just do it for the company," he said, his voice raw and stripped of all its usual arrogance. "I did it because I love you. I am sorry it took me so long to see you. Truly see you." Ilara crossed the room and rested her hand against his chest, feeling the frantic beating of his heart. "You gave me back my name, Julian. But more than that, you gave me a reason to trust again." The months passed, and the world forgot about the business arrangement that had started it all. Together, Julian and Ilara rebuilt Thorne Industries, merging it with Vance Global to create an empire built on integrity rather than ruthlessness. As they stood together on the balcony of their new shared headquarters, watching the sunset paint the sky, Ilara smiled, leaning into the warmth of her husband's embrace. They had started as a cold contract, but they had written their own beautiful ending. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story. Subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories. See you next time. The clock in the massive boardroom of Cross Industries ticked relentlessly. Nathaniel Cross stared at the legal document before him, his jaw clenched tight. His late grandfather had built this empire from nothing, but the old man's final will contained a ridiculous, archaic clause. Nathaniel had exactly 30 days to marry, or the entire controlling stake of the company would pass to his younger brother, Damien. Damien sat across the polished mahogany table, a smug smile playing on his lips, already calculating his victory. Nathaniel knew Damien would bankrupt the company within a year, selling its assets to cover his hidden gambling debts. A contract marriage was the only logical solution, an immediate transaction to secure his legacy. Late that evening, the corporate tower was mostly dark. Nathaniel walked through the silent archives department and noticed a single desk lamp illuminating a massive stack of files. Sienna Hayes did not look up from her keyboard as the billionaire chief executive approached. She was a night shift data entry clerk, hired to digitize decades of paper records. When Nathaniel demanded a file, barking the order as he always did, Sienna slowly turned to face him. "I am paid to digitize the archives, Mr. Cross, not to be your personal errand runner after midnight," she said, her voice calm but remarkably firm. Her defiance was startling. Women in his world agreed with him before he even finished speaking. He looked at her simple clothes and the dark circles under her eyes, an idea forming in his calculating mind. "I need a wife for 1 year," he stated plainly. "I will pay you $2 million to stand quietly by my side." Sienna agreed because the money meant survival, though she made it clear she despised his methods. The ceremony was a brief, sterile exchange of signatures in a downtown office. When she moved into his sprawling glass penthouse, she brought only one small suitcase. Nathaniel offered her unlimited access to his accounts, to buy a wardrobe fitting for the wife of a billionaire. Sienna left the black credit card on the marble kitchen island. "I agreed to be your legal wife on paper," she told him, her chin raised. "I did not agree to become your purchased mannequin. Keep your money until the contract is done." Damien watched the new bride from a distance at their first mandatory social dinner, his eyes narrowing with deep suspicion. The vast penthouse felt like a luxurious prison, but forced proximity began to weave an invisible thread between them. They sparred constantly over his ruthless business tactics and her refusal to bend to high society rules. Yet, late at night, they found themselves sharing the quiet darkness of the balcony. One evening, after a particularly brutal confrontation with the board of directors, Nathaniel found Sienna brewing chamomile tea in the dark kitchen. She wordlessly pushed a steaming mug across the counter toward him. It was a simple, grounding gesture that unraveled the tight knot of stress in his chest. For a moment, the billionaire and the clerk simply existed as two exhausted human beings finding solace in each other's presence. The fragile connection shattered the day Nathaniel returned home early and heard a soft voice coming from the guest wing. He opened the door to find Sienna holding a small, sleeping boy. Panic flashed in her eyes as she pulled the child closer. This was her secret, her 5-year-old son Leo. She confessed in a trembling whisper that she was hiding from a highly abusive, wealthy ex-partner who had sworn to take the boy away if she ever surfaced. She had taken the night shift at Cross Industries to remain invisible. The realization that she had risked everything, stepping into the glaring spotlight of his life, just to secure money for her son's safety, struck Nathaniel with a profound sense of awe and deep, unexpected pain. Damien used this sudden shift in their dynamic to plant seeds of doubt. He casually mentioned to Nathaniel that Sienna was clearly using the Cross name as a shield, manipulating his protective instincts to fight her own battles. Pride clouded Nathaniel's judgment, and he withdrew, wrapping himself in a cloak of icy professionalism. The penthouse grew silent again, but Nathaniel could not maintain the distance. His heart had already shifted. Instead of grand apologies, he began leaving rare, beautifully illustrated children's books on the hall table. He ensured the security detail around the penthouse was silently doubled. He cancelled a vital trip to London simply because Sienna had mentioned feeling anxious about a strange car parked across the street. The simmering tension boiled over when Damien finally uncovered the truth about Leo's father. Damien confronted them in Nathaniel's private office, threatening to leak the child's location to the dangerous ex-partner and expose the marriage as a fraudulent sham to the board. He demanded Nathaniel step down immediately and hand over the company, or he would destroy Sienna's hard-won safety. Sienna stood frozen, the color draining from her face as her worst nightmare materialized. But Nathaniel stepped in front of her, entirely shielding her from his brother's triumphant glare. The annual Cross Industries Gala was the stage for Damien's intended victory. He had gathered the most influential journalists and board members, preparing to play a secretly recorded audio clip of Sienna admitting the marriage was a paid arrangement. But as Damien took the microphone, the massive screens in the ballroom flickered. Instead of Sienna's voice, the room filled with the crystal-clear audio of Damien negotiating a massive embezzlement scheme to funnel corporate funds into offshore gambling accounts. Nathaniel walked onto the stage, handing a thick folder of financial evidence to the waiting federal agents he had quietly invited. Damien was handcuffed in front of the flashing cameras, his arrogant sneer dissolving into genuine, humiliated panic as the investors loudly demanded his ruin. Later that night, the adrenaline faded, leaving a heavy, honest silence in the penthouse. Sienna packed her single suitcase, assuming the contract was now void and she needed to disappear again. Nathaniel stopped her at the door, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for her. "There is no contract anymore," he said, his voice stripped of all its corporate armor. "I spent my whole life protecting a company, but the only thing I want to protect is you and Leo. I love you, Sienna, not as an arrangement, as my life." Sienna looked into his eyes, finally dropping the heavy shield she had carried for so long, and leaned into his chest, her tears soaking his expensive shirt. A year later, the towering glass skyscrapers of the city were nothing but a memory. Nathaniel had handed the daily operations of Cross Industries to a trusted board of directors. He stood on the wooden porch of a quiet, sprawling home near the rugged coastline, the salty ocean breeze ruffling his hair. Sienna walked out, carrying a tray of lemonade, while little Leo chased a golden retriever across the green lawn. Nathaniel pulled his wife close, kissing the top of her head. They had left the toxic world of wealth and power behind, trading a corporate empire for a life that was finally genuinely theirs. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good story of love and redemption. Subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories. See you next time. The gold-embossed envelope sitting on the mahogany desk felt like a venomous snake. Adrian Vale, the untouchable chief executive of Vale Maritime, stared at the wedding invitation from Penelope Ashby. Penelope had betrayed him deeply, nearly destroying his personal reputation before leaving him for a wealthy politician. Attending her lavish wedding weekend alone would be a media slaughter, a public admission of defeat. He needed a shield. He needed the brilliant, fiery woman he had been messaging on an anonymous dating app for 3 months. They had bonded over architecture and dark coffee, carefully guarding their real names and professions. Now, he needed her in the real world. They finally met face-to-face at a dimly lit coffee shop downtown. Margot Ellis arrived shaking off the rain, her bright, intelligent eyes masking a profound exhaustion. She thought she was meeting a simple architect named Adrian. He immediately saw her vibrant spirit, completely untamed by the rigid rules of his high society world. "I have a confession," he told her, his voice low as he slid a sleek black credit card across the table. "I am not an architect. I need a fake date for a high-profile wedding this weekend. I will compensate you generously for your time." Margot bristled, her pride flaring instantly. "I am looking for a real connection, not a freelance acting job," she shot back, pushing the card away without a second glance. But the heavy threat of an impending eviction notice in her purse, a secret she swallowed down, forced her to reconsider his cold proposition. The transformation was flawless, but Margot refused to let the silk and borrowed diamonds define her. Stepping out of the limousine at the sprawling Ashby estate, she held Adrian's arm not as a subordinate employee, but as an equal. Penelope spotted them immediately from across the lawn, her triumphant, gloating smile faltering as she took in Margot's effortless grace. Adrian felt a sudden surge of victory, but also a fierce protective instinct he had not anticipated. The charade required them to act deeply in love throughout the weekend. Whispered conversations meant to look intimate, for the cameras turned into genuine, passionate debates about art, ambition, and life. When a foreign investor tried to corner Margot with condescending questions about her background, Adrian stepped forward to intervene, but Margot handled the man with such sharp, elegant wit that Adrian could only watch in quiet awe. Later that evening, avoiding the crowded ballroom, they shared a single slice of stolen cake in the quiet gardens, laughing softly under the stars. The fake relationship was dangerously, wonderfully blurring into reality. The beautiful illusion shattered the next morning when Margot walked into the estate's historical gallery and saw a massive portrait of the Vale Maritime Board of Directors. Adrian's face was right in the center. The blood drained from her face. When Adrian found her, the raw pain in her eyes stopped him cold in his tracks. "You are the head of Vale Maritime," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of a devastating betrayal. She threw her expensive clutch onto a nearby table, no longer caring who saw them. "6 months ago, your executive team fired me without cause, blacklisted me from the entire industry, and ruined my career. And the woman who signed my termination? Penelope." Adrian was completely stunned. He had been entirely unaware of the lower-level corporate purge Penelope had quietly orchestrated before she left his company. Margot walked out of the estate, leaving him standing alone in the cold morning air. For days, Adrian's towering office felt suffocating. He did not send her expensive jewelry or empty, meaningless apologies. Instead, he spent sleepless nights quietly investigating every human resources file from the past year. He learned exactly how hard she had worked, and exactly how viciously Penelope had destroyed her, out of petty jealousy, over a brilliant maritime design Margot had proposed. Penelope, noticing the sudden rift and fearing her past actions might be exposed, cornered Margot outside her small apartment building. The bride-to-be threatened to use her new political connections to completely ruin Margot's family if she ever spoke to Adrian again. Margot stood tall, her fists clenched tightly at her sides, refusing to back down and exposing the emptiness of Penelope's wealthy life. But the fear was real. She realized she was caught in a dangerous game of billionaires where she had no armor. Adrian did not let Penelope win. During the grand farewell brunch of the wedding weekend, with the media and elite families gathered holding their champagne glasses, Adrian took the microphone for a supposed toast. Instead of wishing the couple well, he methodically detailed a severe corporate espionage and blackmail scheme. He presented absolute, undeniable proof that Penelope had stolen intellectual property from junior employees, specifically Margot Ellis, to boost her own profile before leaving his company. The brunch erupted into absolute chaos. Penelope's new politician husband walked away from her in disgust to save his own image, and the high society crowd turned their backs as she wept in humiliation, completely ruined at her own celebration. Adrian found Margot later that afternoon, sitting on a quiet park bench near her neighborhood. He sat beside her not as a billionaire but as a man stripped of his pride. "I spent my life building ships, but I was completely blind to the people steering them," he said softly, handing her a steaming cup of her favorite dark coffee. He pulled a thick folder from his briefcase, handing her the legally reinstated patents for all her stolen designs. "I do not want you as a fake date or an employee. I want you as my equal." Margot looked at the documents, tears of relief blurring her vision, and finally reached for his hand, weaving her fingers tightly through his. 2 years later, the name Margot Ellis was not associated with a corporate scandal, but with the most innovative independent maritime design firm in the country. Adrian stood by the drafting tables in her bright sunlit studio, watching his wife with pure adoration as she finalized a massive international contract. She looked up, smiling warmly at the man who had traded his arrogance for genuine partnership. They had started with a bitter deception and a cold arrangement, but together they had designed a perfect, unshakable future. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story. Subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories. See you next time.
Editor. The infographic reveals that the 3 stories are not simply romances between powerful men and vulnerable women. Each narrative uses a contract, a fake relationship, or a forced marriage as the starting point for a deeper exploration of control, trauma, trust, social inequality, and emotional redemption. Julian and Ilara begin their relationship as a strategic alliance built on revenge and corporate convenience. Julian initially sees Ilara as a weapon against his rival, while Ilara refuses to surrender her dignity or independence. Their relationship changes when Julian discovers that her pain is not the result of a broken engagement alone. She carries the grief of a destroyed family, a stolen legacy, and a father who died after losing everything. Julian's transformation begins when he stops treating love as a transaction and starts demonstrating care through attention, consistency, and justice. Nathaniel and Sienna follow a similar emotional path, but their story focuses more strongly on protection and vulnerability. Nathaniel approaches marriage as a practical solution to an inheritance problem, believing that money can organize every part of life. Sienna accepts because she needs safety for herself and her son, yet she refuses to become a decorative object in his wealthy world. Her hidden motherhood and fear of an abusive former partner reveal how people in vulnerable situations may be forced to make difficult choices simply to survive. Nathaniel's love becomes real when he no longer protects only his company or public image. He begins protecting Sienna and Leo without demanding gratitude, obedience, or emotional repayment. Adrian and Margot's story examines betrayal, professional injustice, and the imbalance between powerful institutions and ordinary workers. Their fake date begins as a way for Adrian to protect his pride, but Margot later discovers that his company played a role in destroying her career. This revelation forces Adrian to confront his blindness as a leader. He may not have personally ordered the injustice, but his distance from the people beneath him allowed it to happen. His redemption depends on accountability. He investigates the truth, restores Margot's stolen work, exposes Penelope's corruption, and finally recognizes Margot as an equal rather than someone to rescue or control. Across all 3 stories, the male characters use wealth, status, emotional distance, and contracts as defenses against uncertainty. The women appear socially vulnerable, but they possess the strongest moral clarity. They refuse to be purchased, silenced, or reduced to symbols of male success. Their strength does not erase their trauma. Instead, the stories show that courage can exist beside fear, grief, exhaustion, and mistrust. The relationship transformation shown in the infographic moves from transaction to conflict, revelation, protection, and redemption. Attraction alone is not enough to create healthy love. Trust develops when hidden pain is acknowledged and when words are supported by repeated action. The grand romantic gestures matter less than coffee left quietly on a desk, increased security, careful listening, recovered documents, and the willingness to risk power for justice. The social analysis also exposes how corporations, wealthy families, public image, and class differences can distort human relationships. Reputation is repeatedly valued above truth, while vulnerable people are underestimated or treated as disposable. Healing begins only when the characters abandon appearances and choose honesty. Ultimately, the three stories argue that respect matters more than wealth, trauma affects behavior but never determines worth, justice can restore dignity, and lasting love requires equality, accountability, emotional growth, and the courage to truly see another person.